Okay, so it's almost 10 o'clock. It's 9:55 on January 9th. I've just finished Twelfth Night. I'm very tired. I had from January 2nd to January 8th to read Twelfth Night, and then January 9th was the buffer day. I said in my first video I would use the buffer day probably to finish reading. I was right. I think that I didn't need it. I think the schedule is really well done, but I ended up using it because I really overestimated my own ability. I thought that I could get a lot more done during the day than I actually can, so I think there's going to be a lot more of utilizing the buffer days. I think if I'm really going to commit to this, I need to read Shakespeare every day, which I feel like I should be more excited about, but I think I'm not right now because I'm very tired. I did succeed in not falling asleep while I was finishing it, and I was awake enough to understand it and think about it, and I wrote some good notes while I was reading so that when I actually get around to putting some coherent thoughts together, I'll have some good stuff to say to you guys. So hopefully that video will come out soon. But for now, I'm going to bed. Alright, so I'm at work right now, but I finished Twelfth Night last night. As I told you guys, you saw me falling asleep there in the last video clip. I just cannot stop thinking about Act 5. I'm blown away. You know, I've seen Twelfth Night several times, like I told you guys in my first video, and I've even read it before, but just rereading it now, I've really noticed how brilliant Act 5 is. The way everything just kind of unravels is so clever, you know? And I know it seems now like all these things are really overused tropes, but they're so brilliant. I mean, really, the thing about Shakespeare that I love, that I think makes him so brilliant, is that he kind of invented all this stuff. He was the first person who was like, hey, let's do this really amazing creative thing. You know, and I know there's a lot of Shakespeare that he pulled from other people. He has a lot of sources. None of his plays are completely original. But the thing that he did was he took these stories that had been told a whole bunch of times and he made them better. And he really established what our stories in the Western canon look like today. You know, all those plots that we see used over and over again, so many of them come from our exposure to Shakespeare. And you know, just reading Act 5, I'm just reminded of Crazy Stupid Love, the movie. I absolutely love that movie. It's one of my all-time favorites, and I just think it's so hilarious. And one of the best scenes in that movie is that scene in the backyard when all of a sudden everybody's arguing and fighting, and there were all these kinds of mix-ups, and that's what the hilarity comes from, you know? Or even I was watching Modern Family the other night, and they have so many episodes where there's a mistaken identity. For example, in their most recent episode, one of the characters thought his father-in-law's wife wanted to sleep with him, and a lot of it was just had to do with crazy miscommunications. And I just think about something like Twelfth Night and how it's this you know, what people would consider like an old play. It's Shakespeare, it's been around forever, and yet in our society, the idea of identity mix-up is so relevant to comedy today. It's still used over and over and over again, and we never get tired of it. We love it. We eat that crap up, you know? And I think that's why I love Shakespeare. I love that I can see the way he permeates throughout society and throughout media today. You know, not just books, but like movies, TV. I don't know, I just love it. I love that aspect of studying Shakespeare. It's great. So. Okay. Hey friends. So it's been a few days since I finished Twelfth Night, and I've had some time to process and to think a little more than other my initial thoughts, where I, you know, praise Shakespeare's brilliance. And, you know, while I was reading it, I took some notes and, you know, have since kind of looked back over those and thought a lot about what I wanted to say and kind of how I'm feeling about Twelfth Night at this point in my life. Like I said previously, the thing I love about Shakespeare is the way we can take him in our modern world and kind of reinterpret him to fit the world around us. And I think when I read, I do this a lot. And some people don't like this. Some people think literature should never be removed from its context. And I think for me, there's a time and a place for that, where we can't ignore, you know, certain contexts. Like when I read Merchant of Venice, and, you know, you have this Jewish man as the villain, and it's incredibly insensitive and anti-Semitic, but like that's how it was in Shakespeare's time. And then in modern day, we have reinterpreted Merchant of Venice over and over again to kind of make his character, Shylock, more sympathetic. So when I read Shakespeare, you know, on the one hand, you're like, yeah, maybe it has things that we can say are problematic. But on the other hand, like, that's how it was at that time, and it doesn't excuse it, but it's also just like an explanation for it. Like any work of literature, you know, and we've seen this in recent years over and over again, people are going to vilify it for the problems that it had because, you know, it was racist. Because guess what? It was written in, you know, the 1700s. Of course it's going to be racist. Like, and I don't think that's like, oh, we just should all accept racism, but I don't think that we should necessarily throw out every single racist piece of literature. I think free speech is really important, and I think those works of literature can tell us a lot about that time period, and like, honestly, there's great stuff in it. So kind of just to jump in, one of the things that really surprised me reading Twelfth Night is just like the really casual sexism. But I think the great thing about it is you see the women in the play kind of be like, okay, dude, to like all these guys who are kind of a little bit idiotic. And so like that was kind of like nice to see the way that Shakespeare wrote these women to like kind of be, I guess, against the grain of what a woman would be like in Shakespeare's time. So, for example, let's go through kind of my notes here. Okay, so like in Act 2, Scene 4, the Duke says to Viola, who's dressed as Cesario at this point, and if you don't know the plot of Twelfth Night, this is going to be hard to follow because I'm not going to go through that whole deal. Just go online, read a summary, or better yet, read the play. He says, "Then let thy love be younger than thyself, or thy affections cannot hold the bent," as in your affections cannot maintain their like level of intensity. "For women are as roses, who fair flower, once being displayed, doth fall every hour." He's saying like, oh, women, you should love one younger than yourself, because women as they get older become less fair. As in, they get uglier. Cool. And Viola just has to stand there and take that shit? That's a ripoff. And then even Same act right after that, maybe 100 lines later, he says, no woman's heart so big as to hold so much, they lack retention. Alas, their love may be called appetite, no motion of the liver, but of the palate, that suffers sulphite, cloyment, and revolt. But mine is all hungry as the sea, and can digest as much. Make no compare between that love a woman can bear me, and that I owe Olivia. Basically, like, women can't love as much as me because they lack that retention, that ability to maintain love and to remember it like a man can. And Viola responds, but I know, and he cuts her off and says, what dost thou know? And she says, too well what love women to men may owe. In faith they are as true of heart as we. My father had a daughter loved a man, as it might perhaps, were I a woman, I should your lordship. First of all, the Duke is real thick. Because she's like, if I were a woman, I would love you. He's an idiot. But also, like, she just is like, yeah, I know women, and they can love just as much. So she just, like, kind of battles against this, and, it's sort of nice, but I'm also just kind of, like, irritated. I'm like, the Duke is really annoying and doesn't know anything about women, yet Viola still loves him, and I'm like, you need to, like, back off. Here's another example from Act 5, Scene 1. He says to Olivia, when she's rejecting his advances, he says, still so cruel, and she says, still so constant, Lord, because she has been rejecting him this whole time. He says, what to pervasiveness, you uncivil lady, to whose ingrate and inauspicious altars my soul the faithless offerings have breathed out, the air devotion tendered. What shall I do? He's saying to her, like, how dare you reject my suit? Like, you are being ungrateful. Like, I have poured my heart out to you. What more do you want? And on the one hand, I understand the Duke where he's coming from. He's like, I love you. I've been, sending these messages of love to you. I've given you everything I have. Why don't you love me, essentially? But, like, I think in this scenario, what he fails to realize is that Olivia isn't being ungrateful. She's not interested. She told him off the bat, like, hey man, no thanks. And he's like, how could you be so ungrateful? Like, he's sort of a little bit pompous, thinking that, she owes him anything, And I think a movie that I really like is She's the Man. And I think She's the Man, I watched it recently, and it's early 2000s, and I think it's got a lot of sexism in that movie that's sort of was, like, acceptable when it came out, and now people are kind of like, it's a little bit cringy in the way that they degrade, like, the nerdy woman, and act like, oh, like, if you're not a hot guy, like, you don't deserve love. Like, just stuff like that, that's kind of, like, was sort of in that, like, early 2000s teen movie era that was kind of like, now, but was, like, totally acceptable then. Anyways, what I love about She's the Man is I feel like with the character of Duke, they do kind of portray that. Like, he's kind of a little bit of a bumbling idiot. He feels like, I love this girl, why doesn't she love me? I need to get her to love me. But, like, she's, like, totally uninterested, and he's, like, falling all over himself. And, I never really saw the Duke like that in other times I've read Twelfth Night and even seen it. But, like, reading it this time, I'm like, this guy's a fool. It reminds me recently of something that happened in my classroom with my students, is they had this new girl, or we had this new girl come, she transferred in and was added to my class, and she's really adorable and really sweet and really smart. And the boys just fall all over themselves like a bunch of idiots, trying to, like, be her partner during group work, and, like, oh, can I help you around the school? And, like, on the one hand, it's, like, really sweet and adorable, and I love them for it, but on the other hand, I'm like, guys, pull it together, like, you know, you're making fools of yourselves. So I don't know, like on the one hand I really like the Duke and I think it's sweet that he's like really trying hard to like show this girl that he loves her, but it's also like, okay, like she's not interested, move on kind of thing. So I think it ultimately works out, you know, because he ends up not with Olivia, but still. What other things? Another thing having to do with men and Olivia is at the beginning, you know, her brother has just died and she's in mourning, and like everybody's just kind of like, why isn't she getting over it? And I'm like, let Olivia mourn. She can be sad. I mean, I guess it's unclear how long ago it's been since her brother died, but like, I don't know. Just leave the poor woman alone. She's sad. She doesn't need to be finding a husband. She's depressed about her brother dying, and all these people around her are kind of like, get over it. I'm like, her brother died. Leave poor Olivia alone. Some other things that I noticed when I was reading this is just things happen so quickly. I mean, that's such a Shakespearean comedy thing, is that things just, it immediately, just right off the bat, you're like thrown into the middle of like madness. And I mean, things just, in this play, they move very fast. And it just reminds me, like, I was talking with someone else the other day about this, is I love A Winter's Tale. That's my favorite Shakespeare play. And so I just think about that, the fact that I love Winter's Tale because it's not like that. It's slow, and then there's this massive gap of time in the middle of it, and you know, it doesn't have quite the cadence of a lot of Shakespeare plays. Even like the tragedies, things unravel really quickly. Romeo and Juliet is like 4 days. Macbeth, maybe a month. I mean, like, it is things are, you know, happening or falling apart or coming back together at an insane speed. Like, it's A Midsummer Night's Dream like 1 day. I think Comedy of Errors is like 2 or 3, maybe even less than that, maybe even like a day. Like, just the speed and the pace at which these plays happen is incredible. And a lot of it has to do with the writing style of the time period. So in Shakespeare's time period, kind of the fashion when he started writing was things happen in the least amount of time, the least amount of space, as in there's not a lot of like moving from one place to another. Least number of characters. It was like, how can you condense everything into this tight, concise play? And I think it's brilliant that Shakespeare is able to do that. Sometimes the one act play or the one set play where you're kind of in just this one stagnant place is a lot more intelligent. Like the theater company I work part-time for a theater company here in Raleigh. They're putting on a play called Tally's Folly, which was the Pulitzer Prize winning play in 1980. And it's brilliant. It is a 90-ish minute play, maybe a little over 90 minutes. That is just one act, essentially. It's 2 characters, and it's just an hour-and-a-half conversation. And it's literally fucking brilliant. And I think I like that style of play. It's preferable to me to these like broad sweeping plays like I'm about to start Henry VI, and like I'm just like, oh, it's overwhelming. It's too much, bouncing around from one place to another, too many characters. I'm not into that. Even when I read pieces of literature, like, probably an unpopular opinion, but like Game of Thrones is too much for me. I'm like, I don't want to keep track of all that. Sorry. Another thing that I thought is I think it's still really funny. The clown is still really, really funny. One of the things, where's the great scene that I just thought was so fantastic when I was reading it, with the clown, and I just laughed so hard. Is that scene where Oh, I wish I could find it. It's early on in the play where they're kind of going back and forth about who is mad. Oh, here it is. It's in Act 1, Scene 5. And she says, you are a dry fool. I'll know more of you. Besides, you grow dishonest. She says, take the fool away. And he says, take away the lady. And then they go kind of back and forth between, you know, who should be taken away. And they have this nice, like, little comedic riffing back and forth. And, I mean, like, he goes hard. Like, he says to her, why mournest thou? And she said, good fool, for my brother's dead. And he says, I think his soul is in hell, Madonna. And she says, I know his soul is in heaven, fool. And he says, the more fool, Madonna, to mourn for your brother's soul being in heaven, take away the fool, gentleman. And it's this, oh, it's just like that back and forth kind of witty dialogue that really makes this play great. Or even just the whole Malvolio thing where, you know, Maria and Sir Toby and Sir Andrew make him dress up in this ridiculous outfit because they convince him that Olivia is in love with him, and she wants him to wear this silly outfit, and it's great. It's so funny. And Malvolio he's absurd as a character, and I totally get why they play this prank on him, and they like essentially lock him up in a madhouse, and it's funny. I mean, it's cruel and funny, and at the same time, and there's kind of this brilliance of, you know, just laughing at the expense of someone else that makes this play great. I mean, that's the whole humor, and everything in this play is just, how can we torture these other people that we're living life with? And again, it's mean, but it's also brilliantly hilarious. One of the things, though, that I really have a hard time with is, and I feel this way about a lot of the comedies, is I'm reading it and I have a hard time following along because I don't know, you know, a lot of the words. Like, you know, you have to read the footnotes, you know, sometimes to understand some of the puns, and I find it really frustrating that I can't understand it immediately. So like, for something like this, this is in Act 2, Scene 5, where Fabian says, he's talking with Toby and Andrew Malvolio, he says, now is the woodcock near the gin, in reference to Malvolio picking up the letter that Maria wrote him pretending to be Olivia. And if you read the footnotes and pay attention, the woodcocks are stupid birds. They're saying, oh, now the dumb guy, Malvolio, is near the gin. What is gin? It's a snare. Okay, so like now the idiot bird is near the snare. And it's like this layered meaning, this layered metaphor where he's essentially saying like, oh, Malvolio, this idiot's about to be trapped by our prank. And it's like, yeah, that would have been like real funny had I not had to read like all these footnotes. So sometimes I find that really irritating. And speaking of footnotes, I told you guys in my first video that the Signet Classic, I love the footnotes in here. But some of these, I'm like, it's not, like some of them are just not necessary. So like, for example, and maybe it's because like I know the Shakespearean language really well, but Antonia at one point says, would you pardon me? This is in Act 3, Scene 3. And there's a footnote for pardon, and I was like, oh, what is that? And the footnote says, excuse. Like, do we really need that? Would you pardon me? Would you excuse me? I feel like you don't need to define the synonyms. Another one, so Act 3, Scene 4, Malvolio says, let me enjoy my private. What does that mean? Let me enjoy my privacy, obviously, but we have to have a footnote to tell us that. Like, it's a little bit too much. I mean, we can even look at, like this one. Fabian says, and this is at the end of Act 3, Scene 4, a coward, a most devout coward, religious in it. And we have a footnote for religious in it that says, i.e. dedicated to his cowardice, because they're talking about him being a devout coward. And I'm like, I feel like just use your inference skills. Like, we don't need a footnote to define every single thing. You know, like, I almost feel like some of the footnotes treat me like I'm an idiot. But then there are other footnotes that I felt like were really useful. Act 3, Scene 4. I guess maybe like when I was reading Act 3, Scene 4, I thought a lot about this. So that's why all my examples are from it. Let me see. So, Olivia says, well, come again tomorrow, fare thee well. A fiend like thee might bear my soul to hell. And like thee has a footnote that says, with your attractions, like a fiend like thee, as in how she's talking to Viola when Viola is dressed as Cesario again, and she's saying a fiend like thee as in like, you're so fiendish in the fact that you attract me with how good looking you are. And I felt like I didn't need that footnote, but then I felt like there would be people who maybe did. So I think when I'm thinking about these footnotes, I'm like, which ones like, where it's like, okay, just figure it out, and which ones where I'm like, okay, maybe other people need that. And then there are some footnotes, again, this is Act 3, Scene 4, that like really irritated me. Like, for example, where is it? This footnote really made me angry. Toby says, why man, he's a very devil. I have not seen such a farrago. Firago. And I was like, cool, let me look at the footnote. And the footnote says, virago. Virago. And then I had to get on the internet and Google what that meant. I'm like, that's not a very helpful footnote. Like, and I guess virago is a word that maybe people know. I didn't. Maybe I just need to have a better vocabulary or something, but that kind of irritated me. But I think overarchingly, like, there's a lot of good footnotes. Like, even just looking at this same page, Toby says, hobnob in his word, give it or take it. And hobnob has a footnote. And if you look, it says have it or have it not. That is a helpful footnote. How was I supposed to know what hobnob meant? Or how would I interpret that it meant have it or have it not? So I think overarchingly, the footnotes here are great. I just think, like, sometimes it's over footnoted, which I would rather have that, I think, than something that lacks footnotes where I get to a word and I'm kind of like, and there's no footnote for it, or I read a sentence and I'm like, I'm not totally sure what that means and they don't tell me. I find that more frustrating than having an overabundance of footnotes. Okay, so speaking of footnotes too, there's a word that I really love that I kind of want to talk about because I think it's a great word, and I think it's used a lot when we talk about Shakespeare, but maybe the general populace doesn't know what it is. It is called emendation. So emendation is this idea that you have these lines in Shakespeare that are debated. So, for example, let's look at one. Act 2, Scene 2. We have an emendation. It's on line 12, I think. Yeah. Viola is talking to Malvolio about the ring that Olivia wanted to return to Cesario, but it wasn't really his. And Viola says, she took the ring of me. And the footnote says, of the various emendations proposed for this puzzling line, Malone's "she took no ring of me" is perhaps the most attractive. So an emendation is like a correction for a line. Like it's kind of like, okay, this line is kind of poorly worded or awkwardly worded. What did Shakespeare really mean to say here? What should the line have been, or what maybe did people say when they were actually performing it? Like, she took the ring of me doesn't make sense in context. It really should be like, she took no ring of me, which is what they say it should be. Because she took the ring of me implies that he gave her the ring, but that's not
what happened, and that's not even contextually in the conversation she's having with Malvolio, the line doesn't make sense. So they're saying like, hey, this is really what the line should be. This is some kind of error. Now, a lot of people take issue with different translations because some translations will just put the emendation in there, the one that they think matches the most, and others will put it in the footnotes. And I think some people argue, don't even put it in the footnotes, just fix it and like move on. But it's like, some of the versions, like the Signet Classic, try to remain really true to whatever the folio text was, which that's a whole nother issue. You know, there's several different folio texts, and there's some that are considered good copy and bad copy. And so good copy is like, this is probably the most accurate, the most clear, the closest to true Shakespeare. And then there's bad copy, which is like maybe someone who wasn't Shakespeare edited it or added in things, or just it wasn't like properly translated, or as in like copied, not like translated from one language to another. Anyways, so the Signet Classic tries to stay true to whatever the good copy was, which I appreciate, but also I kind of see where other people are coming from. Like, don't make me read a footnote, just translate it into what it's supposed to be. So, emendation. Another thing I really love to do when I read is look for words that I do not know. So, I've picked one word I don't know from Twelfth Night that I'd love to share with you because I love learning new words. Okay, so it's in Act 1, Scene 5. It's the clown and Olivia are talking, and he says, I must catechize you for it, Madonna. Good my mouse of virtue, answer me. Catechize, C-A-T-E-C-H-I-Z-E. I didn't know this word, but essentially it means to instruct someone in the principles of Christian virtue using something like the catechism. Catechize, catechism. I think it's a great word. I feel like I want to use this in my real life. Like, every time I'm at church and someone does something wrong, and be like, I need to catechize you. So anyways, that's a word I learned, and I just love learning new words. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about is the scheduling. This guy, the project schedule that I mentioned in my first video. So 12th Night was January 2nd through 8th. And like I said, I finished it on the evening of the 9th at like 11 o'clock at night. I found the challenging thing to be just finding time. Like, yesterday was the 10th, and Henry VI Part 1 is supposed to be the 10th through the 16th. And so I should have started Henry VI Part 1 yesterday, and I did not. And the reason I didn't is because I worked, and then a student came to my classroom and needed some tutoring, so we did that. And then I graded a stack of papers, and then I had a phone call with EF Tours, and then what happened, I went home and I had to cook. My friend just had a baby, so I went to bring her dinner, and then I stayed there and hung out with the baby, and then I met up with my parents at the bar, and we ended up eating there, and then I went back to their place, and we drank some wine, and my dad and I argued about music, and then I came home at 2 a.m. and went to bed. So I think I don't want to give up, you know, these fun parts of my life to like read Shakespeare. Not that I don't love Shakespeare, but like I love people more, like living people. So I think I need to, I don't know, I just need to maybe like consider where to find time. Like, for example, it's Saturday, my husband is out of town. You know, this would be a great time for me, maybe bang out 2 acts of Henry VI, or 3. So it's Henry VI Part 1, 2, and 3. I have January 10th through 16th for Henry VI Part 1. Part 2 is the 18th through the 25th. And Part 3 is the 27th through February 2nd. So I've got a lot of time to finish the entirety of Henry VI. So hopefully I will get through that. I've noticed that the histories are pretty well spread out, which I like because I'm not super into the histories. Sorry to say it. I have read Henry VI, one of them. I don't remember which. Probably part one. Previously, I've not read it in its entirety. I saw a really terrible production of Henry VI Part 1, 2, and 3, where all three plays were condensed into 2 hours, and it felt like I had whiplash, and it left this really bad taste in my mouth, especially because I'm already not a huge fan of the histories, and then it was like, oh, watch the history plays all like smushed together. It was too much. I'm nervous about starting this one. I feel like one of the big weaknesses I had when I got my master's degree was that I didn't know a lot about British history, and so I had a really hard time following some of the plays, whereas I felt like my British classmates like kind of understood these plays with like a air of ease. I did not feel like I could do that. So hopefully maybe this Shakespeare 2020 project will change my mind about the histories, help me appreciate them a little bit more, or even fall in love with some of them. I mean, like, I like Henry V, but like, who doesn't like Henry V? You know, but I'm hoping that maybe I'll fall in love with like Richard II, or I don't know, what other histories are there? Edward III, whatever. You know, I'll discover something new, or I'll find things that I like about them and whatnot, and you know, we'll see what I want to talk about in my next video. I have no idea. With Twelfth Night, I just started taking notes every time something popped in my head, so, you know, we'll see. And I think I've just accepted that all my videos are going to be 20 minutes long because I talk a lot, and I like to hear myself talk, which is why I became a teacher, so people have to look at me and pay attention to me all the time. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts on Twelfth Night, and I'll see you at some point during my reading of Henry VI Part 1, 2, and 3, but if not, I will for sure see you at the end of my reading of those 3 plays. Bye!